All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the first screencast for Chapter 4. It's going to be a lot of screencasts for Chapter 4 because I've cut up the material into lots of pieces. Some of the pieces are a little longer than the others, but this is one of the more difficult chapters I find for people. And getting the material, once we go past Chapter 4, it's really important for you to understand what's going on here in Chapter 4. So that's why I've kind of cut this up into 7 or 8, I think, screencasts. All right. So this chapter is going to introduce us to a concept called elasticity. Right. And elasticity basically just says is a measure of how big of a change something is. So you could think of, say, a glass of water. All right. And if I heat that water, if I add, say, 1 joule, I think that's a measure of heat, 1 joule of energy to this water, how does that change the temperature of the water, right? How big is the change, all right? So that's what elasticity is about. It's about the magnitude of a change, all right? So, for example, we know from the law of demand, right, that demand curves slope down, all right? We know that as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down and things like that. But what elasticity is going to let us talk about is how big of a change when we change one variable, how big is the change in the other. So the reason I wanted to go ahead and introduce that before I started the slides is the book does not use this term at the beginning of the chapter. We are going to call this the own price elasticity of demand, because what we're going to be talking about is when the price of a good changes, what happens to the quantity demanded of that same good. So here, good X. All right. So when the price of some good changes, what does that do to the quantity demanded of that same good? All right. So we call that the own price. The own price is the price of the good itself. All right, just wanted to clear that up before we started. All right. So previously we've seen that demand and supply balance the desires of consumers and producers in our supply and demand model. All right. Demand and supply steer the market price toward an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. So we learned that the direction of the change in quantity demanded and quantity supplied is a result of a price change. All right. In this chapter, we're going to study the sensitivity of price changes. So when price changes, how much does quantity demanded change? All right. When something shifts, how big is the change in the quantity demanded or the price? So we're going to be looking at sensitivities. And mostly we're going to be looking at the sensitivity of demand to price. So how does quantity demanded change when price changes? All right. We know it goes down. Again, we know from the supply and demand diagram that it slopes down. So as price goes down, quantity demanded goes down. But how much does it go down? You can probably already guess that it probably has something to do with the slope. And we're going to actually see that it does indeed have something to do with the slope, but it's not only the slope. And you shouldn't assume that it's the same idea as the slope, all right? So we'll build that out as we go. So the own price elasticity of demand. Elasticity is the responsiveness of buyers and sellers to changes in market conditions for us here in econ, all right? Why is it useful? Well, it's useful because prices or other demand and supply determinants could be changing, right? So something could get more popular, something could fall out of fashion, all the things we know that shift demand curves. There could be a disaster shifting the supply curve. All these different things that determine supply and demand could change. And so what we want to understand with elasticity is how big is the resulting change to our models. All right. We know they're going to change, but how big of a change? Is it going to be a big change or is it going to be a little change? All right. So instead of just knowing the direction that a variable changes, we're going to be able to study the size of the change. So recall that the law of demand, the demand curve is downward sloping. That gives us the direction of the relationship between price and quantity demanded. All right. The price elasticity of demand, and again, here I'm talking about the own price elasticity of demand, all right? I'm talking about when the price of good X changes, right? So a change, delta, the Greek symbol delta is the symbol for change, all right? When there's a change in the price of a good X, how does that change the quantity demanded for that good X, all right? An own price elasticity, all right? So what is that? It's a measure of the responsiveness of quantity demanded to the change in the price of that good, all right? That's the own price elasticity of demand. This gives us a sensitivity of the relationship between the two variables. So demand is elastic, meaning for a change in price, quantity demanded changes a lot, all right? Quantity demanded changes significantly as the result of a price change. So if I increase the price of something a penny, quantity demanded falls a whole lot. Elastic means it's sensitive or it's responsive, all right? So if we say something has elastic demand, what we're saying is that the price change affects quantity demanded in a big way. You lower the price a little, quantity demanded shoots way, way up. Demand is inelastic if the quantity demanded changes a small amount as the result of a price change. So I increase the price and the quantity demand hardly responds at all. So an extreme example, I increase the price $100 and quantity demanded stays almost the same, all right? So that is inelastic. So inelastic means insensitive or unresponsive to changes in price. So what determines the own price elasticity of demand? So what determines for a good whether or not if you change the price, people respond a lot, or if you change the price, people respond only a little? What determines that, all right? Well, one is the existence of substitutes. So if a good has a lot of substitutes, like canned vegetables, breakfast cereals, many types of products with multiple brands, then it's going to be more elastic. Because if you increase the price of, say, one type of canned black beans, all right, then people are just going to shift to the other kind. You see this when you go to the grocery store. If you are sensitive to the price of canned goods and you consider them substitutes for one another, then if whatever the canned good you're buying is, say chicken noodle soup, it goes up, you'll just switch to another kind. Meaning your quantity demanded of that other chicken noodle soup just went way, way down, all right? So that is very elastic. When there are lots of substitutes, we tend to think that people have elastic demand, all right? Goods with no or few substitutes tend to have inelastic demand. So Broadway theater, rare coins, autographs, drinking water, electricity, Super Bowl tickets. All of these things tend to have inelastic demand. Other determinants of the own price elasticity of demand are the share of the budget that you're spending on the good. So think about a car versus a candy bar like Reese cups, all right? Demand is more elastic for big ticket items that make up a large portion of income, all right? If you increase the cost of a car 10%, that is a bigger deal than if you increase the cost of a candy bar 10%. People are going to be more sensitive, more elastic when changing the price of something that takes up a large portion of their budget, all right? And demand is more elastic for the cheap item. So which would you react to more? 20% sale on a new vehicle you want, or 20% sale on a candy bar? Obviously, the 20% sale on the vehicle is a much bigger deal because the vehicle makes up such a large share of your budget, all right? What are some other determinants of the own price elasticity of demand? Well, the time and the adjustment process, the time and how long it takes you to adjust your quantity demanded to the change in price, okay? Generally, demand for goods tends to become more elastic over time. So if we're thinking about over the course of a year, what is your demand for something versus the course of a week, right? Over the course of a year, your demand for, say, housing is more elastic because if the price changes, you can adapt to that if given a year, all right? However, if given a week, your demand is very inelastic. It is very hard for you to change your quantity demanded of, say, housing over the course of a week, all right? Over time, consumers are able to find substitutes. They're able to adjust for price changes in other ways. All right. So here's a little table that shows us different time periods of them and different time periods and the market response in those time periods. So in the immediate run, there's no time to adjust behavior, so demand is very inelastic, or maybe even perfectly inelastic, meaning you don't respond at all to a price change. All right. In the short run, well, you have a little bit of time to adjust, so it's slightly more elastic than in the immediate run, which I would just call the very short run. And then over the long run, you have time to adjust to the change in price, and so we would say demand is very elastic in the long run. All right. So I'm going to leave you with this clip from The Simpsons, and it's a case where Homer is going to misjudge the own price elasticity of demand for elephant services. You're going to see what he does there. I think I have it now where you can click on the screen and just go right to the link when when this pops up. So I'll see you in the next screencast.